We begin with world news this morning, and more demonstrations expected across the Arab world today as anger grows over an internet video seen as insulting to Islam. A mob stormed the US Embassy compound in Yemen yesterday, and there are also demonstrations in Iraq, Tunisia, Morocco, Gaza and Iran. Protesters in Egypt have called for a 1 million-man march to take place in Cairo after Friday prayers. But in Libya, where the US ambassador was killed during protests on Tuesday, officials say they've made several arrests over the attack. The country's new Prime Minister, Mustafa Abu Shakur, told the BBC it couldn't be justified.
People have the right to express themselves. People, they don't understand that in such a case, like in this case, the American government has nothing to do with it. Somebody made a film and they put it on YouTube, and it was very offensive, for sure. But that doesn't justify to have to take these violent actions against Americans or American embassies or whatever. People, they can come out and demonstrate and express their opinion peacefully.
Nabila Ramdani joined us now, a journalist who specialises in the Arab world. Good morning.
Good morning.
Did you get a sense? It's hard not to that this situation is escalating across the whole Arab world.
Yes, indeed, and I think, as the new Libyan Prime Minister said, people have every right to be worrying about, an offensive, a deliberately offensive film, and indeed intimidating film, which is seen as an insult to Islam, but it by no means excuse, extreme violence up to and including murder, as was the case in Libya. And I think in the case in Libya, the U.S. ambassador and indeed his 3 colleagues died not at the hands of an angry and offended mob by an offensive film, but at the hands of jihadist militants. And the attack against the U.S. embassy in Libya appears to be extremely well planned and extremely well coordinated, and there are several indications that it was carried out by a radical group inspired by Al-Qaeda, and that includes a factional commander who was celebrating the death of the ambassador, and links to a radical group called Ansar al-Sharia have been made abundantly clear, even by Libyan authorities.
But there is clearly latent hatred or latent feelings towards the United States. Clearly there are many people who, because this video wasn't produced by the American government, was it? It simply appeared on YouTube, having been produced in the United States. So there must have been plenty of people waiting for an opportunity to do something like this.
Well, absolutely. I think at the heart of all these very angry protests is a very strong anti-American sentiment. The Arab Spring did a great deal to improve relations between the West and the Islamic world. But remember, there is still a great deal of suspicion and indeed distrust about the USA in the Middle East and North Africa. And it doesn't take much to trigger such suspicion and anger into political action and indeed terrorist violence. And this is particularly the case when the West routinely uses violence itself to achieve its own political ends, such as, alleged terrorists taken out by drone strikes or indeed an intervention.
But Nabila, but what the American government say is that we were there to help those people, to remove a despot, to create a democratic state, that it was being done for them. So just try to explain why that feeling would persist even when the Americans have been to help them.
Well, I think on the face of it, it would appear baffling that a country like Libya, which benefited from the help, Western help, to protect civilians, should turn against the very people who helped them in the first instance. But it is also very true that if you speak to Libyans, that there's still a bit of resentment, because it was a mission which was aimed at protecting civilian lives, and it turned into regime change. Let's not forget that there was at the time, and there is still, an awful lot of supporters of the former regime in Libya. And there I say it's also, pragmatism. Relationships can change and can turn very quickly, just as relationship between the West and the Arab world change. And certainly people in that part of the world haven't forgotten that the West was very prompt to support and indeed back up Arab dictators before turning against them, and certainly in the case of Libya.
Big day today, isn't it? I mean, Friday, we've learned that as we've been following developments in the Arab world over the last few years very close. We've learned that Friday is a big day.
Yes, indeed, because it's a day off, leaders, Muslim leaders, have called for protests after Friday prayers, and I think it has to be said that it would be very naive to view the protests against the film as spontaneous. Of course, there was an element of that, but there is clearly a strategy behind those protests as well, with radical groups vowing to get revenge, and the argument for protest is a very simple one. Islam has been insulted and we must fight back. And this appeals to the kind of impressionable young people who are invariably involved in these attacks. But crucially, it also has to do with radical groups trying to make political capital out of volatile, unstable post-Arab Spring countries and present an alternative to the new governments in place, which tend to be backed by Western governments.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Nabila Ramdani.